Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface. And Father, today I wanted to continue a discussion that we had, or at least mentioned in our last episode, being that we all know that at some point that we're going to die. While we all simultaneously have a desire to keep living. So that is kind of the duality that we have as human nature within us. So, what I wanted to discuss in this episode, and not try to politicize diseases, as has been the case for a long time now, but to just address that inevitably we're all going to have something that's going to fail us physically and get to this point of either ourselves, and well, definitely ourselves, but people around us as well eventually are going to get sick and all of these other elements. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I obviously now have a son, so I have to think about these things in a different way, in terms of how do we address the notion that I need to build up his immune system, and to do that he needs to overcome things on his own. Whereas at the same time, I do know that there's this thing in my shelf that will just make things better. And yeah, to a certain extent, that is a physical rudimentary question. But as we grow more in life, it's also very applicable to the spiritual side of the world, where there's going to be some things that I could step in and just fix for them. Think about 2-year-old and 3-year-old problems. But there's also things that if he learns how to do them himself, he'll be better off for the rest of his life. So essentially what my question is, and this is very broad and encompasses a lot of things here, is how do we as teachers of the future, I mean, you're a teacher yourself, but in looking at my case in teaching my son, where do we walk the line of interfering and stepping in to correct someone's actions versus kind of letting them figure it out themselves? And there's probably an answer in the middle somewhere. But how to go about that as far as having the mindset of the appropriate way of being a guider?
Well, I'd say about 6.5. That's probably a good place. Of course, it's a ridiculous question for an answer, a ridiculous answer for a question that can't be quantified. You just played out some of the balance there that exists and that we should be aware of. There are things that we learn to grow in, and we need to exercise our own freedom. And there are things that we need to have done for us. There are things that are better off with kind of the long game of, building up strength or skills, and other things that should be done in the short game, just taking a pill. And how do you find the balance in all of that? Trial and error. There's and really learning from the wisdom of those who have gone before. And I think there's a fair amount of flex there. There are no absolute answers in any of those areas. And so there's also a matter of discernment. What's God asking of me? But I'm edified by, Maria Montessori developed a number of, did a lot of work in terms of childhood development and the normal ages at which children grow in different ways. And the first 6 years of life, children tend to be more independent. The next 6 years of life, they really want to work together. And so kind of honoring those different spaces. The first 6 years of life, they're really developing a lot of skills. They're interacting with the world. They're trying to do things on their own. And so they need to be shown, but then they need to have the chance to mess things up. And I love Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. I've mentioned that a number of times. And they even have a toddler version of the CGS. And so I know the child will be asked to pour something. Pouring is a kind of it's a liturgical skill. We pour things in the liturgy. We pour the wine into the chalice. We pour the water into the wine. And so these are liturgical skills. And a child is given, and we also pour for the hand washing. And a child is given a chance to do some pouring. And of course, when a child is given at the age of 2 something to pour, it's going to end up on the table. Now it's just water. And every adult will want to try to like get in there and stop the child from pouring the water on the table. But the answer is, well, if you pour the water on the table, you have to also clean it up. And then you're learning like how life works. You can make a mess and then you have to clean it up. And that's not a judgment. You don't get shamed for that. It's not a matter of good and evil. It's just the way that life works. And so those kinds of things are really helpful when we let children do things, and then we also let them handle the consequences if they're going to spill things, break things, and again, it's not a matter of shaming or punishment. It's not a way to exert anger. Well, you clean it up. It's just, this is how this works. And the child will figure out, well, I don't want to clean it up. And so I'm going to pour more carefully. And that's how all of us grow. So that's just one very little example, but there's a whole range of things. When teenagers are ready to practice being adults, that's one of the insights of Maria Montessori and her work in childhood development. And this is all borne out in subsequent decades after Maria Montessori lived in the first half of the 20th century. And it also fits quite well, actually, with the models of the human person developed by St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages. She certainly had much more research in terms of the details, but just the idea that we grow in our capacity to think by also growing in our capacity to use our senses and develop our skills. So the brain doesn't grow in a vacuum. The brain is the spirit, the intellect is nested in a body, and so we use our bodies and in order to grow in our concepts and understanding. But she understood that teenagers are ready to practice being adults. Now, they're not ready to be adults, but they want to practice being adults. They want to try to do things. So if you're going to go on a family vacation, let your teenager plan it. Now, you're going to have to kind of look it over and be a little bit careful that he get all the details. But give your teenager the chance to practice being an adult. It's the failure of a lot of our youth ministry programs, I think, in parishes, is we tend to create this sort of infantilized environment where we're creating educational entertainment for teenagers, and they're really not interested and they don't show up. But if you let them take ownership of it, you let them practice being adults, let them practice setting the agenda and finding out that something works and something else doesn't work, give them the room to fail, to make mistakes, then they can do a lot of growing through that. So I do think that there's an area that you're kind of aiming at in your question, I think, Joe, which is let people grow. And that's, you were talking about it in terms of disease and, being exposed to everything on the floor. Every child eats everything on the floor, and it's probably good in the end. They get a lot of antibodies as they expose themselves to a lot of things. And there's certainly the extremes are there. We can identify that. If they aren't careful, they can end up eating rat poison. That's not going to be good. On the other hand, if you keep them away from everything and they live in a sterile environment, they'll be super vulnerable to even the most mild cold. And so the extremes are fairly obvious. Where you land in the middle is, again, going to depend a little bit on your own temperament. Some people tend to be overprotective. They're going to have to hold themselves back a bit and loosen up. Other people tend to be overly permissive, and they may need to ramp things up and pay a little bit more attention to the consequences or the actions of their children. And so everybody needs to kind of find their own way through that process in terms of parents caring for children, and then in terms of our own lives. Some people tend a little bit more towards the kind of fearful side of things, and may need some. Getting help is always a good thing to do. That we're supported by other human beings. Nothing in the Christian life and nothing in our human development is aimed toward never needing anyone for anything. So the goal, the perfection of our human life is in love. And so it's in relationships. And so the more that our human life orients towards getting help and developing relationships, that's always going to be a good thing. So we're never aiming at total independence. That's not a goal. But there may be areas that, God has gifted us in certain ways to be able to carry out certain tasks or things that we're a little better at. And some people who might be a little bit more fearful might have some gifts in terms of really seeing the dangers that are there. Sometimes people are a little foolhardy and not accurately evaluating the dangers that are present. But the sometimes people are a little more fearful because they see the dangers more clearly, and that's not a bad thing. Some people who are foolhardy need to be told the dangers. Some people who are fearful need to be told, well, but every danger doesn't happen. The worst case scenario is not always the one that unfolds. And that's where, again, we can see the balance that's struck if we have relationships, if we are open to other perspectives, if we're in open communicative relationships with others who can balance out our weaknesses or our strengths. And so the best thing is to do it together. And that's where, even husband and wife can often be a nice combination. One may lean a little one way, one may lean a little the other way, and together they have to come to a compromise so that they can be on the same page, and they have a nice way of balancing each other out. And that same dynamic goes into lots and lots of other scenarios, other settings as well.
Well, that certainly applies to us. I mean, I'm safety sometimes and she's safety always, all the way through. And the one thing that I wanted to, and I know that there's no hard answer on this one either, but in terms of the world we live in, particularly with this thing called Google out there, we can always find someone out there on the internet who will, if we comb long enough, who will back every single point that we're making, whether we are factually correct or not. And what I wanted to kind of press in here, and maybe we can do a little bit of a dive into it, is how do we, as individuals, get out of our own zone to make sure that we're just not listening to what we want to hear, but actually seeing the totality of a situation? Both applicable to what we're discussing here, but that's a general life skill that's vast to all animals of our life. So I wanted to see if we can spend a quick little minute on that thought about how to open our minds beyond just what we want to hear to be able to get the entire breadth and totality of the situation as a whole.
Yeah, you make a great point, Joe. There is somewhere on the internet that will back up whatever your idea is, and do it with a lot of sophisticated language. Um, it's Yeah, I mean, it's become such a problem in our society. It seems like we live in a lot of silos, and we don't like to hear alternate perspectives. Uh, I think one thing is, making friends is helpful. Maintaining family relationships is helpful. Recognizing that we need another perspective is helpful, and then kind of stretching ourselves to receive that is really important. Just knowing that and choosing it, dying to ourselves is there's always another side to the story. There's always another perspective. That's just a useful thing to keep in mind. But then I think also being the person that's going to give another perspective. I hope you and I model this well on the podcast, Joe, that like if we can be a little bit more balanced and not overstate our position and recognize that there are two sides to things and be a little bit gentle in presenting things so that we're not imposing ideas on people, but are really offering things to think about, offering perspectives that people can look into and consider. And in general, it's always good to foster a lot of freedom. Freedom is one of those gifts of our humanity. And so the more that we can foster freedom in people rather than always being on the debate circuit and trying to like convince everybody of everything, um, let's demonstrate it and take the questions seriously that people have rather than just dismissing them out of turn as like, well, that's a crazy liberal whack job, that's a conservative bully, that's a, using a little some less labels and more charity and trying to cultivate more humility and to recognize there's always a truth in things, even if they are astray. There's a truth that's there, and we can always find that and draw that truth out. There's always a point of connection, even if maybe one person is taking one approach to whatever, vaccines or the pandemic or the mitigation or something. Somebody's taking another approach. Can we at least acknowledge that both are concerned about, human life, and some are concerned about human life not being limited by whatever vaccinations or restrictions or whatever else. Others are concerned about human life not being affected by the virus or having full symptoms. But there are two different paths, hopefully approaching the same goal, which is the reverence and protection and thriving and fostering of all human life. So anyway, it just helps when we can presume those who have a different perspective are not simply evil incarnate, and that they do have something to teach us. And then if we can learn to hear that and take it in and take it seriously, then that really helps to foster a much healthier dialogue between people.
And not just a dialogue, but it also helps you understand both your side and the other side better. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be that every single time you hear new information, you're going to change your perspective. Sometimes you hear the other side and it reinforces what you were thinking because you've heard another perspective or you saw how they came to the conclusion. And I think that is part of what I was trying to discuss a few weeks ago when I was talking about how it seems so much in modern culture we only focus on who's saying something rather than what is being said. And I think that we all are guilty of falling into this trap of, I've heard, I want to put this person in a category so that I can determine whether or not I'm going to actually listen to them or just write it off, as you gave a couple of examples that are used today. And to me, and I apologize if I'm getting off topic here, but to me, that's what the danger of trying to put everyone into a group is, rather than taking everyone's individual thought or teachings, but trying to put everyone into a group. To me, that just seems incredibly counterproductive and probably dangerous in terms of way of trying to function. And I get that we've discussed before that there's kind of a human nature that requires us to do that. When we see an animal, it's an angry tiger. We're not going to think that, oh, maybe this is the nice tiger. We have the thought of, oh, every tiger wants to eat me, so we need to run away or prepare for this. But when we're talking about individuals with free will, that's not applicable. And it's a thought that had been getting me in different angles, attacking my mind, just something that I really wanted to articulate. I get that that's a little bit off from where this episode was going, but
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize, there's a purpose to acknowledging people in groups. There's a certain shorthand that goes with that. Oh, if you are Catholic, then you believe these things, support these things. And roughly speaking, that's true, and so I don't need to go through with somebody every one of their beliefs. I know they belong to this group, and I know that situates them roughly in this set of beliefs, actions, associations, relationships, etc. So there's a point to that. It's not a strictly evil behavior to uh, put people in groups, but then we often talk about pigeonholing, which is I'm cramming somebody into a space that's smaller than they actually are. as if they can't think outside of a certain ideology because they belong to a group. And somebody might say that about Catholics. Oh, now we often end up qualifying it. He's this kind, a conservative Catholic or something. And therefore, he hates everybody that commits abortion. Well, now, first of all, you've gotten our belief structure wrong. We don't hate people. We do hate sin, and we hate the sin of abortion as an example. But I don't hate the people that are involved. I love the people that are involved, which is why I care about their souls. So yeah, one of the problems is we cram people into groups and then we get the beliefs of the group wrong. We caricaturize it. And then also it's like, okay, well, some conservative Catholics have, this kind of feeling on, I don't know, immigration, or this kind of feeling on liturgy, or some of them are really in favor of the traditional Latin Mass, and some of them don't know it as well. So there's some fuzz around conservative Catholic. It's not a description that accurately characterizes the entirety of someone's person. Uh, I happen to be somebody who loves the Latin Mass and loves the charismatic renewal, and loves a lot of things in between. And so people might try to pigeonhole me and, oh, he's a Latin Mass guy. Well, yeah, I also like stand in parking lots in front of liquor stores and evangelize street people. It's like, what can you really characterize my whole life by this small category? So that's where we have to be careful. And categories like Republican and Democrat are even worse. I mean, there are so many different kinds of Republicans, or different kinds of Democrats, or different kinds of independents, or a category can be a starting point. It's a shorthand. It gets me to an initial set of ideas, but then I need to validate that against reality. Just because some conservatives seem to be louder and more obnoxious or something doesn't mean that all of them are. And so I need to actually get to know you or whoever I'm meeting, rather than simply leaving them in a camp or pigeonholing them in a category.
Yeah, and as we look at that and see, there's such a temptation to do that, especially when everyone around us and seemingly the entire internet is geared towards trying to put you into a pigeonhole, and then us continuing to expound upon that tidal wave of momentum. And I think that we are called, and unless I'm mistaken, to be better than that, and to actually look at people for what are their actual actions, and what are the actions and results of things that they are pushing for. And some things, we're given this gift of intellect that we can see the natural progression of this idea one way or the other. Now, we might not be able to fully enhance and computate every variable involved. It's very difficult to do that, and very few people can. But in general, we can see that if I ate an entire diet of ice cream, I wouldn't be very healthy in about the third week if it took that long. And there are some basic things like that. So I wanted to kind of end this episode with the thought of, we are called not to pigeonhole people, and to look at them as the totality of their being and what they're actually saying and doing, and what those results translate to for them, and would they be beneficial for me to practice in my own life. So I want to give you a chance to get the final word on today's episode as we move forward into next week.
Yeah, that's right. We all have a partial view to things, and we really need each other. I said it several times now. There's no ideal in Christianity of not needing anyone for anything. There's no ideal of ultimate independence that we're aiming at, and so we're really aiming to become one. That all may be one, as the Father is in the Son, and the Son is in the Father. That all may be one in Him and in them. And so that's really what we're aiming at, and we're not going to get there if we pigeonhole, exclude, exile, if we condemn and refuse to listen, and so we have to work towards hearing, and ultimately we're given we're able to see better when there are multiple of us trying to see at the same time, and then we get a fuller picture. And so we should learn to celebrate that and rejoice in it. Not to say any of that's easy. I mean, I certainly have people who are very ideologically opposed to me, and it's hard to find that common ground and to work through some of the conflicts. And but we've got to make the effort. That's what it is to be Christian, is really to aim at everyone being united in Christ.
And what a beautiful goal and task for us to take forward into next week. So we thank everyone for listening to us, and we will be with you again next week.